Yeah.
No, but we want to retweet it.
Yeah. So let me see if I can grab it real quick.
By the way, Steve, so this year I've had really hard time getting into into conferences. Last year I had conferences coming out of the wazoo, and this year I just couldn't get accepted into any.
Wow.
And no, finally I got accepted into two and had to cancel on them both, which is funny. But
Okay,
so there are two.
I put the link in the chat.
I I don't see the link in the chat.
Oh, there we go.
I don't see it yet.
In the stream chat.
Yeah,
StreamYard
StreamYard chat.
Tweet this.
Is it in your account on X?
Yeah.
So just go there.
We're already picked. We're 10 people, 11.
Nice. I'm posting now. Tweeting/posting now.
Which is pretty normal. We'll see it pick up here a bunch. Maybe I should be streaming it to both.
Yes.
All right.
Dan, you have no hypothesis as to why the conferences have not been as conducive?
So one possibility is that I'm not talking about AI, which if that's the case,
that's possible.
So just a second, I want to finish retweeting. Just a second.
Yeah, I'm actually pushing things a little bit more toward AI, and I'm going to be putting out on the podcast stream. I'm going to be putting out short episodes about AI.
Nice.
And it's going to be specifically AI and JavaScript. And then I'm doing the same thing for Ruby, actually. So I'm on Ruby Rogues. They're going to be getting them. And it's starting to look like October. I'm looking at doing a boot camp where I just, for 3 months, we do a couple calls a week. We go through different curricula. I help you where you need it and just basically break down, okay, hey, you want to build different AI-based features into your apps using something like Ruby or JavaScript, or if you're using another language, because people kind of the lingua franca of AI is Python, but then people are like, well, I don't want to do Python, and I don't want to get into the whole, wrangling my own model and data and crap. And so it's like, okay, look, there are services out there that do this, right?
We actually interviewed one or two.
Yeah, so I'm doing it from the other end where it's, hey, you're going to use these APIs to get to these large language models and things like that.
Yes.
And build.
I mean, there's never been a better time.
Yeah.
Never been a better time to do that, especially I think where there's a void of information is I need to put out more on this too, of like what the large language models are good at and not good at. It actually, I feel like it's taken us a ridiculous amount of time, our company spending many months, an insane amount of hours dealing with LLMs and custom models and stuff to really whittle it down to a small list of things they're good at and a long list of things they're not. And just like, the idea was somebody just told me, here's what they're good at, here's what they're not, like very concretely.
And I think that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about. So
I think we should.
Absolutely.
We should start the show.
Yeah, we should.
That's good to me.
All right, I'll kick it off. I was just waiting for Dan to be done retweeting. It's going up fast now. We're almost 100 people watching.
Cool.
So
hey, everybody.
Welcome everybody.
AI.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel we have Dan Shapir.
Hey, from a still very hot and muggy Tel Aviv.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. Yeah, it yesterday we had a high of 95, which was nice and cool compared to what it's been. So yeah, I feel that. We also have Steve Sewell from Builder.io. Steve, do you want to say hello and remind people who you are?
Yes. Hey, everybody. I'm Steve. I'm our co-founder and CEO at Builder. We make cool AI, design to code, design to live, website CMS stuff, which I'm sure we'll go into. And it is only 58 degrees Fahrenheit in San Francisco. It's not hot at all. I wish it was a little hotter, to be honest.
Wow.
Well,
Is that why you're sitting in the server room? Get a little
A
warm?
little warm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Good deal. Well, we got you on. I've seen a whole bunch of videos from you about AI. Um, I know you run builder.io with Mishko and a bunch of other folks. And I guess what I'm wondering and where maybe we should start is, okay, so what is the CEO of this, hey, build your website with us? What, you know, why do you care about AI? Like, how does that fit into the life that you're running? And, how will that fit into the life of somebody who's going, hey, I'm a JavaScript developer?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. So, I actually, as weird as it sounds, I'm a little bit embarrassed in retrospect, but I think it's probably still the right idea. I was excited by LLM progress when I was seeing
Mhm.
it. GPT-3 was interesting, but very hard to get good results from. 3.5 was a big breakthrough. Like, oh, it's
Yeah, it was better.
easier. It was better. It was noticeably better and easier to work with. You could talk to it like a human, not like you'd weird. I remember GPT-3. Somewhere it would say something even as simple as ending your prompt to get a completion off of with like a new line or something. It would like break the whole thing. So they'd be like, just don't
Right.
do that. And like 3.5 was like, let's assume humans are humans and we will, make sure it works with whatever you give it. That was pretty huge breakthrough. But even then you saw like all these companies rushing to add AI to their product, or like,
Yeah.
we even had VCs who invested in us. Like every CEO is talking about redoing their whole roadmap to be focused on AI. People are rebranding their companies AI. And I was like, I'm thinking of like crypto and all this stuff. And I'm like, no, we are not doing that at all. We are dabbling. We're not changing significant plans. As we dabbled further, the potential, the hypothetical potential became really clear. If you work in that space of like, you've got a design and a program like Figma on one end, and you've got a website or app that you probably have a mix of developers coding on, because we focus kind of on larger businesses generally. So you've got developers, you're not like some small mom and pop shop or something. So you've got developers writing code, and you have people who are not developers trying to put out pages or update pages or something through a CMS. Where can AI help most? We've seen all these cool demos, and this is where things get confusing too, is there's a lot of demos that are not representative of the average user's experience. So you could, for instance, go into ChatGPT and have it summarize a long piece of text, and every demo will do well, and every user's experience will probably be pretty good at that. That's something that the LMs are good at. Take a large amount of information and condense it down. And if you don't like the style of how it condensed it, you don't like the language it used, like when I paste a huge amount of stuff and I tell it like, turn this into an email, it assumes that I'm like this corporate person emailing a million people. I'm like, no, we're startup. We're what are we now? 70 people. I use a pretty chill vibe when I talk. Here's some examples of how I usually talk. Emulate that. ChatGPT is still pretty bad at that, but Claude is much better in my experience. But anyway, those are good. But then you see these other demos of like, these one-off cherry-pick things of like, AI built me this whole program. That's awesome.
Right.
In fact, Claude with artifacts is great at generating like a snake game or something. But that gives you a look into like what people would like to have happen. People would like to, if I'm a developer that has a Figma design coming from a design system and it's got behavior implicit in it. This is a new dashboard mock-up with we've got APIs for this data, and we've got components for these charts, and it's got a layout in Figma. If I could just turn that into like almost finished code to just start me off, there's always nuances I got to do. But if you can connect it to APIs, assemble the components, create the layout in Tailwind, whatever I'm using, and then let me work on it from there, that's pretty cool, especially when those things can actually work fairly reliably. That becomes like a why not type of thing. Why am I writing this all by hand if the AI can do that pretty effectively?
Right.
On the flip side, if you're, because part of what we are is a headless CMS. So if you're a user trying to create new pages within a Next.js app or whatever, same thing. You've got this mock-up of a page. If I could just click a button and make that become real, and then maybe use natural language to say, actually move the button over there, or when I click the button, it should trigger the auth flow or whatever, rather than learn this complicated tool of like, yes, we have the auth components registered in the tool. And yes, we have our APIs connected over here. And if I know how to click 100 buttons, I could do it. But if I could just say it and have it happen, that's the pipe dream. Right. That's the obvious reason to care. The question obviously is just how well can it do that? And then more importantly, how can we make a reliable path to make as many of those dreams come true as possible without being full of foot guns? And that's been kind of our focus in research and development over the last year or two.
So it's basically the domain that the space that you're working in is essentially Figma to code.
That's a way to think about it. It's not every customer's use case. You don't, as you can imagine, if you could turn prompts into real life stuff using the React components you have and stuff, you don't need Figma. You can just tell it to make me a thing and it can make you the thing. But Figma is probably one of the most common ways you represent in great detail what you want to happen before it happens. So you could think of us as like if you saw TL draws, like their make real demos, they diagram, you hit make real, it becomes real. You can think of us as like an entire make real application or platform. Most of the time, those are in Figma designs already. Sometimes they're just in a Jira ticket or a Slack conversation. We imagine a future world that's not too far where we could have like a Slack bot where you tag the builder Slack bot. It looks at the thread, it summarizes your idea, implements it, sends you back a link. How does this look? Turn that to code, sync it to your code base, or just hit publish, run it as a 5% test and see how well that does. Stuff like that, can be.
So Figma to code without the Figma.
Yeah, with or without the Figma. That's one way to put it. Totally.
Right.
To be fair, though, you're not. It's not really greenfield. I mean, Figma themselves, as I recall, are looking at ways of transforming their designs into code.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. Yeah, I think the green fields of LLMs are what I think the hype is real. I was very against making any deviations to our plans or our marketing or anything just because AI looks cool. I feel like there's a lot of startups who just, AI looks cool. We want to be cool. Let's just do that. We put a lot more thought into it before investing behind it. And to be honest, in most cases where I saw startups just say, AI looks cool, let's do AI, for lack of better terms, some would see spikes in signups. Some would do kind of cool things. But where I saw many fail completely were when they were adding AI for AI's sake, as opposed to solving major problems that only large language models could solve. So there are random ideas of things we could do with AI for the sake of doing it. But one of the biggest problems that Figma has in their code generation, that we have in exploring this too, and that site builders have, is that people have a lot more ideas than they can get into code in a high quality. And any tool that's tried to turn any Figma idea into code in an automated way is bad. That's the simplest way to put it. They do a very, very bad job. And we found a few techniques that work pretty well that can only be done with LLMs. We found that at the end of the day, like, it's funny because I don't want to overhype LLMs. I think they're a critical missing piece, but they are not the full solution. So what I mean by that is,
right.
I've got some videos about like use AI as little as possible, and I still firmly believe in that. Most of our AI solutions that just look like, for instance, a Figma design is the input or a prompt, and the output is code. It looks like we just fed that into the LLM and we got that out the other side. There's a ton more code than that, and that's good because we have control over that. It makes the product differentiated. There's not just an enormous amount of code pre-processing the heck out of everything, post-processing the heck out of everything, but also we've trained our own models for specific parts too. And so you can take various approaches here, but the one that's worked well for us is solve everything without AI as much as possible. Break it down into the tiniest problems that are just not really solvable with just typical, conditions in code. For us, those were much smaller than you think, especially if you really grind out the problem. It's really small what you can't do without AI. But there's probably going to be some point, like if you're turning designs to code or prompts to code or whatever, that what you can't decipher with most models you could train yourself. You could do training as simple as things like decision trees, which can work great. If you just don't know what value to put into a box or set of values, decision tree training with like XGBoost or something could be phenomenal to wipe out a bunch of crappy conditional code into one. Essentially, the AI takes example data and kind of writes conditional code for you in a sense. Fantastic. We use that for certain things. You can do fancier stuff like random forest, which is, a bunch of decision trees to help you make a decision. Awesome. But what nothing can really do well outside of an LLM is understand meaning of things. And that's where, again, the LLM in our experience should not be treated as this opaque box where very raw inputs get out and very finished outputs get out the other side. But when you start identifying, here's a basic example. You've got a responsive design and it's got desktop and mobile. And on desktop, you've got a nav, with all the links horizontal. And on mobile, you've got a hamburger menu. there's no world where we could solve that without an LLM. But again, we're not passing the designs in and saying, figure it out. We're not doing screenshot to code, which is kind of awesome sometimes, but always not quite right. People want, you designed with precision. You use the specific design tokens of Figma components. Those map to design tokens components in your code. When it's a screenshot, that's the conduit. You lose all that information. And that's, you try not to lose that. Unless you're like, again, you're just you're building some random project on the side. Maybe you don't care. It's just beginning. But if you're doing work or company, you need a lot more than that for it to be useful. You don't want to have to get code and rewrite it all. And so you need to use some type of LLM to understand the meaning of that and say, oh, this should become an interactive hamburger menu. It did not have to figure out all those other things, how components map, how design tokens are mapped, all this stuff. We figured that out in advance. And we've found a format to pass that into the LLM, heavily pre-processed, when all we're saying is, here's baseline code that's almost done. It's just ugly. It's poorly named. It's poorly structured. And it might have some semantic misses. Like the accessibility might not be quite right because we programmatically generated this with old school code and old school models, which are fast and reliable and best to use when you can. But all you want to do is do some cleanup of the code, refactor this, name the components better, give it some props and better class names. And then anything that's meaningfully wrong, such as the way we converted the horizontal nav, maybe our default logic turns it just vertical, because that's kind of a rule that works pretty well in responsive design. Stuff side by side becomes vertical on the narrow screen. When that clearly didn't work well and you actually wanted a hamburger menu, have the LLM take a pass at that. Maybe that's the area that's least accurate, but still pretty much there. And then you're not having the developer at the end of the day have to tweak everything. They may just have to make some small tweaks to that hamburger menu. That's a bit rambly, but that's maybe an example.
Yeah. I kind of want to back up a little bit. One thing here that I'm just going to throw out there, we talked to Obi Fernandez on Ruby Rogues, and he's got a book about, building and working with the LLMs, and, it talks to APIs, and, it does, he's building chat assistants, right? So we're kind of talking about a different problem set, but I think a lot of the ideas are the same, where he basically breaks it down and says, so you have a GitHub AI chatbot, right? And so it knows about its APIs and its special things that it can do. And then you might have some other bot that knows kind of the next level up that orchestrates things, right? So he was advocating to like break things down into really, really granular things and have it come together that way. Of course, his stack is kind of a stack of AIs, and you kind of figure it out and set up context and things like that. But I imagine a lot of people, and there are some comments to this effect on here too. And I think this is kind of where I want to start with what you've talked about is, Jack Harrington on Twitter said, what are the wrong ways to integrate AI into your application? What are some of the right ways? And you kind of got into, breaking the problem up and things like that. But then, Charles G said, AI is only reliable for prototyping and search. It feels like vaporware for most other stuff. It's fairly expensive to use. Models, gotten off the hype train. And I think some of the stuff's going to get better. But so you talked about these specific instances, but what are the problems that it solves well? Like, so where do I look at my stack and go, okay, I want it to hit here, and maybe I'm gonna hit this and this and this and this and this and this, and I'll have different models or different LLMs that I hit or whatever. But how do I know that this is a good fit? And then how do I start putting that in there? Because it does feel like some things are moving this way. Other things, it's not there yet. But
so before Steve answers, and I'll definitely let Steve answer, I just wanted to mention that one of the catalysts for this entire conversation is an excellent blog post that Steve wrote and posted on the Builder blog, which is titled "How to Build AI Products That Don't Flop." So I think that in a lot of ways, what I assume you'll be saying, and it kind of also addresses a lot of the issues that were brought up, or what is stuff that you actually wrote in that blog post. So first of all, we will post that blog post here in the chat. I highly recommend for people to go and check that out. And it also, I have to say that it also resonated a lot with me because of stuff that we are doing at SciSense, which is the company that I recently joined, which turns out has a very similar philosophy in how we're using AI in our own products. And maybe I'll touch on that after you kind of answer the questions.
Yes. No, this is a great question. And so, at the end of the day, maybe it starts by covering like what are the AIs bad at and why, and that can help us distill down what they're good at as an alternative and why. So what they are bad at is the biggest problem that LLMs have is what people call hallucinations. I don't love that term, but it's the term people use, where they just make things up and they make it up confidently. And it's probably a result of how they're trained. They're just trained on lots of information of people saying, they're just saying things. They're saying things as if they're factual.
My kids say that it's the same approach that I take with most everything.
Just say what you think as if it's certain.
I say what I think and I say it very confidently.
Exactly. Yes. I know many people in my life, I probably am one as well, who will do that as well. Whatever you think, whatever kind of sounds right, I got complete confidence in it when saying it out loud.
I've never done that ever.
So you think about it. What's the training data? It is an AI trained on emulating the training data, and the training data is humans saying things as if they know everything. So the AI just says things as if it knows everything. In the however many billion parameters they use, they can't store all the information in the world. Right. And it seems like to date, people have still not figured out a reliable way of having LLM say, sorry, I don't know the answer to that. They will just make up dates and times and answers and stuff like that. It's very annoying.
So I just want to chime in here because this has always been a problem with AIs, right? Is you have a certain probability of not getting a right answer. The difference is that the answers we're looking for now are a fully written out email or code or things like that, right? Where you can be mostly okay, except for these couple of things where in the past it was generally something like AI vision or something like that. And so if it didn't always identify the dog as a dog, people would just kind of, as long as it was generally accurate, it was useful. And now it's problematic because it's generally accurate, but that's not good enough.
Exactly. Or especially if you think about it, a good example is we have like one of those apps that lets us know when an animal goes in front of the camera at home. So we think it's our dog, and turns out it was just a shadow. But it's like, who cares? Like, whatever, the AI is wrong, who cares? When it's not a who cares is when it's an essential part of a product. Like the product has a flow from start to finish, and the LLM is wrong 5% of the time. That's a huge problem, especially when you use LLMs maybe for multiple steps.
Or if it's wrong 100% of the time, but to a 5% extent.
Yeah, exactly. That's a problem. Those add up. Yeah. If you think about, everybody loves the idea of AI agents that could complete multi-step tasks end to end. Well, those little errors compound to become big problems. And if you've ever used something like AutoGPT, it derails and it's a big problem. It starts generating a mess of data. It has no clue it's been off the rails for the last hour. It just makes it worse. And that's a huge issue with this kind of future we want. But there are solutions to this. So actually, there's two solutions that we found to be extremely effective. One has to do with actually that blog post you mentioned, Dan, and one has to do with some like micro agent techniques we've been really investing behind, both in an open source project we've recently open sourced and some work we're doing internally in the product. So solution one that works fantastic. Let me give an example. Builder has lots of docs. People don't know the answers to their questions, and it's tedious to try and comb through all the docs to find your answers. No matter how we try and restructure the docs or surface the right information at the right time, it's never good enough. And I know that when I use other people's products too.
I was going to say, you're not the only ones. I promise.
Exactly. It's everybody's problem. It's very difficult. And so we're like, okay, let's feed all of the information of our docs into, the context window for an LLM. And that's the big change that's happened recently is the context windows have gotten freaking massive. And that's huge. I've even seen papers on using the large context windows is more effective than fine tuning. So rather than fine tuning with hundreds or thousands of examples, just fit 10 examples in the large context and you'll outperform. But they didn't even mention, or maybe they did and I missed it, the biggest benefit
This is one of the things that Obi talked about in the Ruby Rogue episode too.
Yeah, and so what's practical, because I assume if we're talking JavaScript devs, we're talking practitioners. They want to use the AI. The practical benefit of that is you don't need to assemble those thousands of informations. You don't have to make a separate fine-tuned model instance for every use case. You can assemble things on the fly or make changes and experiment at a faster rate. It's really opens up a lot of benefits. And so what didn't work well, so here's, if you go to ChatGPT and ask it a question like, how do I add a user in builder.io via API? It'll tell you, go to builder.io/API/user, send a post. That API doesn't exist. There's not an API to add users to your account in Builder through APIs, though it will tell you that it exists. That's a huge problem. So then if you then try and augment this with, okay, well, we're going to take ChatGPT or Anthropic Claude APIs, and we're going to supply our API documentation into it. Maybe we'll do some fancy based on embeddings and semantic search to find the right docs to include in that context and send it. It still will, it'll get better, but it still will tell you to add a user, go to API v1/users. And so the thing that works extremely well, so what the LLMs are really good at, in my experience, is condensing information down. So if you tell it very clearly, here's a set of information, you are only allowed to answer questions using this information. And if that information has the answer, condense it down and provide the answer. If it does not, say, I don't have an answer to this, it probably doesn't exist. That works wildly well in our experience. Whether that's here's a lot of code, simplify the code, whether that's here's a transcript, tell me the key points discussed, whether that's here's the API documentation, answer questions about the APIs. As long as you firmly say you can only use this information and nothing else, it works, I mean, almost 100%. And I mean almost in terms of like LLM still can surprise you from time to time. Use a good one. So like don't use, I hope people aren't using GPT-3 or 3.5 anymore for most things. There's better options. But if you're using something like Anthropic Claude 3.5 Sonnet and you're giving it lots of information, more than it needs, and telling it to reduce and only use that information, it works great. Another example was, so we have this assistant in our docs that answers your questions, and it works a lot better. Another thing it started doing, though, is making up links. Like, oh, I added to the instructions at one point, like include links as much as possible, because a lot of what you're doing, or a lot of what we hope AI can help with in navigating docs, is just knowing what, for my use case, what docs I need to read. And so I told it, fill the answer with links. Maybe just a way to quickly find the right links is a good example. But I started making up links. So what did I do? I added to the prompt, I took our sitemap essentially and some additional context on each link, and I fed it into the prompt and said, use links, only these links, nothing else. And then fantastic, it always links to things that are relevant. The more you do that, the more you tell it to do nothing more than condense information and use nothing more than the information provided, and just add a copious amount of information, because these context windows are massive, it can work phenomenally well. So that's a use case that can be great. Another example of that is how our AI design to code works is we have old school code and old school models generate fairly accurate code for a design. It's just verbose and ugly. It's just too much. It's one massive component of div soup, and the classes are named like div1, div2, div3, div4. If you take that and pass it to an LLM and say, just reorganize this into multiple files and components, well named, rename the classes according, etc. Again, give it a model like the latest 3.5 Sonnet, or GPT-4 is pretty good, but Sonnet's really good. It does a fantastic job. And so we've spent an enormous amount of time in the past trying to take generated code and try and make up class names. How the heck are you going to do that? That's back into that bucket of meaning. We don't know meaning in any type of code or model before an LLM really for this type of use case. But if you can distill down that way, it works fantastically well. And then the last piece we've learned here, and I'd love to touch on the agent piece because there's one other technique that's great. The last piece we've learned is the user interface matters a lot too. And there's a user interface pattern that is just almost always wrong, yet we see almost everyone jump to all the time, including us, which is you want to assume that the AI is never perfect. And especially because when we're talking about meaning and summarization and stuff like that, it will not get everything right the first time. Even if it's accurate, it may not be quite exactly what you wanted. So what you don't want is a UI like we used to have, which is like, if I wanted to get Builder to update my content in some way, it used to be like, click a button, then you get a box, then you type in it and hit submit, and the box goes away and it makes your update, and it like acts like you're done. Most likely you're not done. Most likely it got you closer, but you're not quite there, at least some portion of the time. We've actually been landing on a chat interface is almost always the right interface for an LLM, even if your use case is not chat. So if your use case is imperfectly designed to code, and here's code, you should have a chat interface next to it saying, what would you like to change about the code? Oh, I forgot to mention I'm using Tailwinds. We'll update it.
Mm-hmm.
There's too many components, or there's not enough components. You should be able to constantly iterate, and the chat format lets you maintain that context and never assume it has to be done the first time. Or what's coming soon for us is importing Figma designs and then like a Figma prototype where you have like, you have this mock-up of like clicking this launches this modal and does this thing and updates this data. Well, we're going to suck that in and make that real, but not every, Figma is not a spec. It is a suggestion, right? And so we need to treat it that way. And no, it's a description. So we're going to treat it that way. We're going to make some assumptions. And then when actually you want clicking this to do that, you should be able to say it and see that happen. So that's one big bucket of learnings. The other big bucket of learnings is if you want to use LLMs on a loop, you could describe an AI agent as just an LLM on a loop of do a thing, analyze a thing, do the next thing, decide when you need to stop.
Right. The only thing I would add is that whatever you're telling it gets added to the context window and things like that so that it knows what you've already done and what you've already told it.
Correct. And you could also add that it's taking actions in each step. So
the
prior thing feeds into the next thing, the next context, and it takes another action and it continues.
Right.
Those are, I think people firmly understand how we will be able to do even more magnificent, wild things with AI at some point. Like I mentioned, we envision a world where another example is like assign a Jira ticket to a builder and have it just implement that thing. And then you take a look at that, or the Slack example too. Here's our idea, implement it. Because Builder has an API and could hook right up to your live app, you could have it, if it powers your homepage like it does for lots of customers like JCrew or Zapier or whatever, you could just tell it like, hey, update the homepage with this, and it'll just go do it. Maybe it, to be safe, runs it as a 1% test, shows you in a day that the data is good, the A/B test is winning some, metric, and then you scale it up, stuff like that. Awesome. Just be my homie that helps me do tedious stuff that I didn't feel like doing. The problem, though, with agents that have to take a sequence of actions is how they derail. Those small errors compound. So you need some type of mechanism to bring them back and analyze, are they off track or not? And so this is a technique we've been using. We call it like a micro agent technique because it's about being specialized. And I think this is a topic that has to do with product development in general, which is don't try and boil the ocean. Like don't try and build Devin, the world's do everything software engineer. Then suddenly you're solving everyone's problems simultaneously. It's an impossible task. It's not a good idea. Rather, if you're an agent for one specific type of thing, starting there and then building up over time through feedback, through iteration, through all that stuff, that's how I always believe in building products. It's worked better for me. So we have this open source project called MicroAgent where the technique we realize works really well is if on each step you can have something that's not AI. We're exploring if AI can be this step, but I haven't had good results yet. But something that's not AI can essentially test if that's in, and then let the LLM run again. So it has the feedback from the last iteration.
So for example, if you said that you had the LLM output explanations that were link heavy, and you said that you verified the links by limiting it to your sitemap. But another thing you could do is obviously just look at the links at the response, test them out, and if you get, I don't know, 500 or something, then you can feed that back and say, okay, that link is broken. Don't provide that as an answer, or something like that.
Spot on. No, that's a perfect example. And that's what we've seen. So I'll give you a couple more use cases for this. So one, how the micro agent project works is the CLI. And instead of going to like ChatGPT and saying, give me some code that converts Markdown to HTML, you instead will run the CLI micro agent and describe that. Convert Markdown code to HTML. Instead of just giving you code and it's your problem if it doesn't work, instead it generates a test first. And it'll have all these input-output examples of Markdown to HTML. And then it'll say, does this look good? You can get feedback on the test, like this is wrong or add more or less or whatever, or just say, okay. And then it'll write the test and then it'll write code. And every time it writes code, it'll run the test and any test.
AI-TDD.
Feedback. It's AI-TDD. And it works really, really well, especially for certain use cases that AI generally wasn't good at before. And so you get this sort of guarantee that when AI is spitting out code, you don't have to any longer hope that that code works, because it'll look good and it might work on one example but not others. The test will ensure it works on all the examples. And when I run microagent and have it generate big complex things for me, I rest easy that if it passed all the tests and the tests are pretty thorough that it generates, it works. And then if we find any issue subsequently, we'll update the tests accordingly. So it actually is a much more like high confidence solution. One other example is Figma has this concept called component sets, where it's like how you represent a button with all kinds of variations, like color
A
primary and
design, it's
size
kind of a
large.
design system sort of thing.
It's a design system feature, exactly.
Mhm.
It's how you have something similar to React components in Figma. So you can place the button and change the color from primary to secondary, error state true, whatever. It's cool. It's weird as hell how it works in Figma. In Figma, you actually design. So if you have like 3 different props with 3 different options each, you have to make 9 designs. You have to manually code up or design every possible combination. It does this weird, it's funky, but it's effective. So how you translate that to code, what we do is we generate baseline code for every single variant, and then we tell the LLM consolidate down this all down into one piece of code with props, in React. And what we do is, to verify that the LLM did that correctly, we will run it through tests. So because we know what the end state of every combination of props should look like, we then take what the LLM provided and test it against every end state. We give it every combination of props and make sure that the essentially the snapshot is correct to the original spec. And if it's not, we feed the feedback in. And if we've actually found you can play with it, you can either feed this to a slow, high quality model, like before 3.5 Sonnet with Anthropic, there was Claude Opus, which if it's not obvious, I've had way better experience with Anthropic models in general than OpenAI models. That's becoming more popular now and more discussed, but it was a little bit of a hot take in the past, or less common knowledge. But anyway, you can play with the knobs. You can either say, we're going to do the big expensive model and probably takes less iterations, or you can scale down to like we actually had good results with Anthropic Haiku, their smallest model. And it would take 4 or 5 iterations, but that would run faster than the 2 and 3 on Opus. And you're still guaranteed an accurate result at the end. So if you have that automated check that can feed into the AI, it can work really well. And that's kind of my point again about, hopefully this illustrates good examples of AI can't be the entirety, the brains of your product, but you can isolate these different techniques and use it to accomplish things that just would have been kind of impossible previously, so to speak.
Related to what you just said, one of the salient points that you made in the blog post, and it's kind of related to what you just said right now, is that in all cases, it's not about building your product to be wholly AI centric with a thin layer around it. It's taking some existing service or product that solves a real problem and then sprinkling in AI to make it better. And so it's the reverse of what the VCs might have liked, but but it's much more grounded and down to earth. And like I said, where I'm seeing very similar thing at Sisense. We kind of build dashboards and stuff for BI. And so in the past, it was like, you basically need to either, in best case scenario, drag and drop to build your dashboard, or you might, do some coding to build your dashboard. Well, it's now we're working on, like you said, the sort of a chat thing where you can describe the dashboard that you like, and you get it, but at the end of the day, it uses all the components and know-how and capabilities that we've already built for constructing dashboards. So it's adding AI to existing infrastructure to make it better and to make it more approachable, I might say, and easier to configure, and without specialized knowledge.
It what you're talking about, Dan, it sounds like it's a different level of interactivity, right?
Look, at the end of the day, even like 10 years, when Google came out, I said, what was it? It's 20 something years ago. I said, why aren't our UIs like that? Instead of pull down menus and stuff, just give me a text box where I can say what I want and the software does it. Well, we're finally kind of getting that in a
Right.
way.
I think I have a question related to this because, Dan says we're finally starting to get to this. And it seems like, we've talked about, hey, we had GPT-3, which was, we had GPT 3.5, which was okay. GPT-4 is pretty good. I mean, are we going to continue to see this kind of thing too, where, we get more of the text box, or, I mean, the demos and the demos kind of made me upset because, then you'd see people trying to do the demo where they were talking to GPT-4 and it wasn't working for them like the demo worked. But, we're a lot closer. How does this continue to advance?
Yeah, I mean, the assumption we're making is that it's hard to perfectly quantify this, but the models will get something like 10, 20% better year over year. They'll get, some percent less hallucinations or weird hiccups or weird problems. If you have a 95% success rate, maybe next year you have a 96, maybe next year you have a 97. And these things tend to slow down, though they also tend to be little S curves as well. Like I think one not counter argument, but counterpoints to the idea of it slowing down completely is things like, I don't know if you've used Grok, G-R-O, and I'm forgetting what spelling. One is Elon Musk thing, but one is like a hardware company. A hardware company, I think it's G-R-O-K, is super interesting because they can run Llama 3 at insane speeds. You type in their box, you just get tons of text quickly. And they were one of the first to realize at a full ability to commercialize level that you can make hardware optimized for LLMs. And it's not just like a small percent better. It's like 10 times faster and cheaper, which is crazy. And so we are not currently using Grok because we need larger context windows, and Llama 3 and all the others don't support the huge context windows that like OpenAI and Anthropic have. I'm hoping, I know Meta's still training Llama 3 400B, I think it is. And so that, maybe it magically has a larger context window. I don't know. That could be huge. But breakthrough innovations like that could accelerate things. One example of that is like, hey, people love the idea of, as an example, because Builder has an API and SDK, it can dynamically render your React app and components when you drag and drop or use AI to modify it. You can see it all in real time. So it feels like Figma, but it's actually your React or Quick or Vue or whatever app. So that's cool. And then changes can turn to code or hit publish and they're live to your users. So you can get people who are not even developers making changes, pushing updates, marketing pages, or whatever you want. But what people really love the idea of is, well, why are we hard coding apps at all? Can't we make components and understand things about our users? And when I jump into, jcrew.com, can it just dynamically produce an experience that's one-to-one personalized and fitted for me? Now that's like, wow, that's cool. We're not even close to that. I've watched the code generate slowly enough times to say we're not even remotely there. But then when things like Grok come out, which is probably the first commercially successful as in like I see people using it. I'm using it myself from time to time. Breakthrough in LLM performance, that was a big step towards that. You see that paper of like, what is it, 1.5 bit yada yada for LLMs. And it's like, hey, you might take another leap forward as well. I don't think Grok is using that architecture. I think he uses something differently. So that might be a subsequent innovation to add on. Now it's like, okay, if we can do these in real time, maybe that is possible. Only for certain parts of your app. It's not, it's not like you deploy an empty repo and suddenly applications build themselves in front of users in real time. But like you could start small. Like we were working with this very large company on a use case where they want to just be able to type in a very common use case. They want to type in a query and fetch the data associated to whatever that is. So like, I just want to see this data, and it can pull the data and visualize it for you. And the way they're doing visualization is code generation, but just like any tool, this is very common, or they're using Anthropic Claude artifacts or TL draws make real, you always get just like funky, plain old raw HTML or React. It's not like using your APIs, your components, you're using tail, like whatever. It's not using it's not code that's going to go to production. It's all throwaway code. But if you could instead be able to, in real time, either offline or online, assemble what you have, your pieces. Offline use case would be like, I'm just going to import a page to Figma and then I'll hit publish and then that'll go online when I'm done editing. So that's ultimately the offline use case. The online use case would be show me these things on demand. So this large company that wants to surface your data wants to generate code effectively with your components. Well, what can do that? We already have these SDKs where if they're aware of your components, they can dynamically render out in real time your stuff. We're exploring like, hey, yeah, you query your stuff and it's aware of your just the components you want it to be for this use case, charts, diagrams, pie chart, table, etc. And it can just dynamically produce UIs based on your specific query in pretty real time. Using Llama 3 on Grok, it actually works pretty well. So that's sort of like your first like online on-demand generation. And that makes sense for logged in users maybe paying a certain amount per month. That could be justified by the cost of serving that. But if we keep making these innovations on cost and speed, et cetera, you could get to a world where online generation of parts or larger parts. I mean, let's take, if you're J. Crew, maybe you want to manually merchandise that hero. You want to promote this new product line. So the hero is this thing, but maybe down below, whatever. Amazon highly personalizes the products you see. What if you could just throw that at the LLM and the whole UI is based on what you'd be interested in seeing? Those are kind of interesting. I can't remember if there was a question here or what I was answering, but I want to throw that in because I think it's interesting direction that we might get to.
Maybe we'll also get to a world where it's not just what's their name? The only company actually making money off of AI is I'm blanking out.
So Microsoft with Azure powering everything.
I was going to say Microsoft.
No, who makes the hardware?
NVIDIA.
Oh yeah,
NVIDIA is the only company actually making money off of the AI revolution.
Their stock price definitely,
yeah, because you raise money as a startup and then spend all that money paying NVIDIA.
This kind of gets into one of the other questions I had, and you mentioned this. The previous question that you were answering was, how does this continue to advance? And I think you pretty well answered that. Beyond that, you kind of got into more of the arena of cost and speed, right? As opposed to capability. And of course, cost and speed kind of play into capability, right? Because if it has infinite cost, then I can't provide it to my customer unless they have an infinite bank account. And similarly, if it's not fast enough, then again, it lowers the utility. So one of the things, as I've talked to some people who are beginning to adopt AI features into their stuff, is up to a certain point, it's great, and then it gets expensive, right? So how do you start to manage some of that?
That's a great question. That's something we've looked a lot at in a few different kind of findings of ours. First one, I could tell you just from a consumer point of view, I hate the idea of all these different applications trying to charge me another $20 per month per user for their AI features. I hate it. Part of me is like,
you've solved my problem. Thank you. Right?
Yeah.
I don't want to pay more for it.
Exactly. And it's like, the part that kills me is, and I know no product should ever do this. It just doesn't make sense. But I'm like, I know you're charging me that amount because the LLM is expensive. Can I just supply everyone my OpenAI or Anthropic key, and they can just bill me based on usage, and you can just make sure the way it works with your product works really well. I don't imagine anybody doing that. Obviously, when we make open source AI projects, we have several. Yes, you just supply your key, and then it works that way. But yeah, those things really add up. And in a lot of cases, I think the companies are just trying to make sure that their bottom line is taken care of. They know if they don't charge $20 a month, if you use this heavily, they might be underwater on you, and that's a big problem. And a SaaS company usually wants to have 80% margin. So if you're going to cost them,
but we're back to the Uber model. We're back to the Uber model. Like raise a whole lot of money and then basically subsidize your users.
That's how GitHub Copilot started out. They were losing money on a per user basis, but aren't anymore. At least that's what was reported. And so, I think we're definitely seeing that across the board. Also, a lot of startups losing money on the training costs and all the other costs as well, from VC money. But, you could probably put a value on it. It doesn't even take that much math or mental exercise to put a value on various things. For instance, we just have our AI in our docs for free for anyone. Anyone can prompt and use it. in a lot of cases, you can, one, just ship it and see what it costs. It doesn't cost a ton. And two, we actually know, our platform is probably in the bucket of, it's not trying to be like a Vercel, which is like, it's one button and you never do anything. You never have to know anything. It's definitely, there are things to learn and more power to get as you learn.
Also, your model is different. I mean, at the end of the
Correct.
day, your model is a customer every once in a while needs the AI in order
Yes.
to translate their Figma designs into code. I
Yeah.
assume they don't do that every day.
Right.
Whereas
That's spot on.
Verstel is you're not even a paying customer yet. Here, we'll show you how we take your whatever and use AI to turn it into whatever.
Yes.
It's a totally different model in terms of the finances.
Exactly. And that's
Yeah.
where you need to make sure you just have to make sure that the value you're providing and the rate that the user needs AI to get that value is less than you're charging them. And in an
Right.
ideal world, what we've done in a lot of cases is it's kind of back to that point of making sure you do as much as possible without the LLM. It's going to be faster, cheaper, better for 99% of the flow between whatever input, whatever output is needed. And so that's how we cut down on costs dramatically as well. Use our own trained models when we can. If you are in a world where, Charles, you were mentioning the example of like, you might use multiple LLMs, and we've done that in some cases. Like, there's various ways you can do this, but there are certain use cases where you might want an LLM to plan the work first, and then another
Right.
LLM to execute on the plan.
Yep.
That can be a really good one. It can be not expensive if you don't need to feed too much context in multiple times. The output
Right.
of a plan is usually not a lot of tokens. But it can be, let's say you needed a whole chain of LLMs, or let's say you had a situation where LM1 takes lots of context and provides a plan. And then you have different LLMs execute on each step of the plan, but they each need the large amount of context.
Right.
Then it can start adding up, and it's like, can we do that without LLMs? Or can we do other things? In the design to code flow, there's a lot of different steps. And for us, some of the steps that can't be done with code, I mentioned we train our own models. Those are, it's hard to underscore how drastically faster, cheaper, and more reliable training your own models than an LLM if it's a fitting use case. And the fitting use cases might be more outside of the box than you might think. Like, yes, one of our use cases is image detection. When you have a Figma design, certain things that are like 100 vectors should actually be one image when it gets to a web or app, and then the text around it should stay text and UIs. And so that is a good sufficient use case for like an object detection model, which uses a convolutional neural net. Very common. It's hot dog, not hot dog. It's identifying dog, but it's identifying an image from training data,
Right.
which in our case, you can generate that training data from the web. Scrape web pages, see what our image is, screenshot it, give it the screenshot plus the bounding boxes where the images were. Ta-da, you've got infinite training data. You can train your models. But when it comes to things like decision trees, I think are way more interesting than people realize. You can break a lot of problems down to decision trees where you basically provide for a very specific problem. In our case, it can be things like, here's a whole mess of layers in Figma. Which of these should be considered grouped together, like, into a flex row or column? Things like that, you can actually generate decision trees and be able to figure out, or random forest, or you can start simple, like conditions in code, upgrade to a decision tree. If you need to upgrade to a random forest, if you need to upgrade to a neural network, if you need to upgrade to an LLM at that point, and you can play the cost knob as much as you want. And there's definitely cases of products I see sometimes online where I'm like, the economics are just not going to work on that product. I know you're charging 20 a month now, but that's not going to last. You have to find one that will.
So I have to ask. I mean, I assume that, what is it? When did you found Builder.io?
Oh, goodness. 2019, I think. End of year 2019, something like that.
So 5 years ago, more or less.
Yeah.
4 or 5 years ago. I assume that 4 or 5 years ago, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about today, you didn't know.
Correct. Yes.
So a lot of what we're talking about today are things that you learned during the past 4 years, maybe even 1 or 2 years. How did you go about learning all this stuff?
Great question. I do have an
fed
answer
the
for
internet
this.
into his brain model. Oh, sorry.
No, it's more of an agentic approach. I hate that word, by the way. People keep saying agentic. It's like, I don't know if that's a real word.
I don't know
I
what it
hate it so
means.
much. It means agents like. It's like referring to
Oh,
like an
okay.
approach like an agent, agentic. It just feels like a VC talk term, but whatever. It's the more
I'll
the
just
agent
put on some
style.
shades and use code words.
I mean,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
AI was this academic thing a couple of
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
just a few years ago, and all of a sudden, it feels like you need to be an expert, and otherwise you're kind of potentially left behind. So it's a whole lot of stuff like that you need to learn very quickly.
Well, so
Yep.
in my opinion, a lot of people naturally say, I want to get good with AI, so I need to learn how AI works. I need to get a book on machine learning. I need to take a course on machine learning, like how the neural networks are trained or how transformers work under the hood, etc.
I've
In
done
my
that. It is
Yeah,
hard.
it's hard,
It's
and
so hard.
in my opinion, it's like trying to learn physics to answer questions about biology or
Mm,
psychology. It's
hmm.
not usually a good idea. It's not going to give you that high of ROI.
Right.
And I'll give you an example. I majored in cognitive science in college, which is like the closest thing to an AI specific major that existed at Berkeley. And I dropped out after 2 years because it was actually horribly impractical. It was some cool information, but it wasn't as practical as I just want to get hands on
Right.
and build stuff. And still today, in my opinion, the way you'll learn more about how to build effective AI products with LLMs, et cetera, is to build AI products with LLMs and run into all the issues. I don't think the academics could tell me all the strengths and weaknesses for our type of customer and use case that an LLM will or won't have if they haven't actually gone through it all. Now, if you look at like the research papers coming out, there actually are different categories of research papers. Some are actually useful. Some are literally sort of like the analysis of the usage of these things, like the one I mentioned, comparing fine tuning to context windows. That's actually useful, but that's not necessarily big brain stuff. Even if they have some weird calculus equations, you could feed it into, you could upload a ChatGPT and ask what you want to ask, and it'll tell you what you're looking for from the paper, which is nice. But all the ways I have learned anything is just rapid iteration. So that applies to learning AI, that applies to building a company in general, building a product. That applies to learning how to market. I didn't know how to market anything. We made a ton of mistakes in the past. We still make mistakes now. Selling, it's just, I'll take it. Builder needed its first customer. What did I do? I asked around, like, what is sales like? And people are like, I don't know. You go talk to people and see if they want to buy. So I just started talking to people, seeing what they want to buy. And I made a lot of mistakes. And now I could tell you 1,000 things not to do, 1,000 things to do instead, just from trial and error. And that's where I think a lot of people, whether they're learning to program, build more complex software, get users for their software, whatever it is, too frequently people fail to just say, I'm going to be bad at this. I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm going to do so many times that I'm going to learn infinite things not to do, which leaves a smaller and smaller window of what to do. And once I have that small window of what works and that long knowledge of what doesn't, at that point you could say I'm actually kind of good at that thing. And all it takes is doing. And just like the agents example, it just means lots of feedback. So doing something and getting no feedback, you're not going to learn anything. But I think like a big learning of mine is like, hey, we'll be like 100-person company by the end of the year. I've never run 100% company. I think the biggest team I managed previous to this company is 8 people. So it's like, okay, how do I know what to do? What I do, I get as much feedback as possible. People tell me what's wrong. Tell me what's wrong. We'll fix it. That loop works. The product too. Get the product in people's hands. Let them tell you what's wrong. Fix it. Try stuff. I think that abstracts really well to so many things.
Do you have dedicated AI people in your company?
Yes-ish. We're not large enough. We really do have an AI team. Yeah, we do. About 3, 4, 5 people. Some people dip in and out of it. But even then, that team probably wouldn't self-identify as AI people. They would just be like people who are working on AI here and getting really good at it quickly by working so hard at it.
Yeah, I want to chime in and just back up half a step, and that is the way that you describe the way you learn this stuff. What I find is that's the way that the people who really know something have learned it, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're feeling like, oh, well, I don't know if I want to learn AI because it looks hard. It's just like, look, I learned web development by hitting my head on the wall a zillion times, right?
Same.
Oh, it's broken. Oh, it's broken again. It's broken again. It doesn't look right now, but it works. Okay, now it doesn't work, but it's, and you just do it. And so I just want to encourage people, like, if you're looking at this and you're going, boy, it sounds like kind of a slog and kind of a journey. It's just the way it is, right? I will point out that, you know, I have a computer engineering degree. And so, you know, I got into, you know, writing code, and I still banged my head against the wall a whole bunch of times. I just had a little bit deeper foundation than maybe somebody else. But if I wanted to build the castle, all the head start I had was that I had a little bit deeper foundation. I didn't have any of the walls up. I didn't have the moat dug, none of that stuff. Right. And so, you know, you as you're looking at how you break it down, I really want to encourage people to just look at this. I'm working on putting together a boot camp that, you know, goes through a lot of this stuff, do it in October. Right. And that's the same thing, right? Is, you know, I kind of want to be there. So when you run into the wall, you know, you're not stuck trying to figure out how to get off the wall and go do something, you know, do the next step, right? You kind of get there faster, but you're still going to run into this, even if you have somebody holding your hand. So yeah, just be aware that's kind of the way that a lot of this goes. I kind of want to pivot this. You were talking about, you know, getting left behind, right, on some of this stuff, or, you know, it moves ahead quickly. And, you know, yeah. One of the questions that I get from people is, okay, well, do I have to learn it? And then the other question I get is, because you're talking about specifically, so when we talked to Obi Fernandez on Ruby Rogues, he was talking about the AI systems that replace, you know, services like copywriting and ad optimization and things like that, right? You know, aspects of running your business, right? And so, you know, the programmers, you know, would listen to that and not feel super threatened, right? Because they're gonna be in a place where they're going, you know, this is not something I do anyway. But you're talking specifically about, hey, I'm going to take this Figma and I'm going to have working code at the end, right? And yes, you've kind of let us know that there are various stages of effectiveness to this, but is it eventually going to get there where if I'm writing React or Quick or something else, that, you know, my job is going to be, you better write a really good prompt for the system so that it'll give you the right code? And is it going to make it harder for people to get in? You know, is it going to cut salaries because the AI does a bunch of my work? I mean, how vulnerable are we to this stuff?
Great question. Let me give you an example. So the short answer is, I don't think developers have anything to worry about. I think they only have things to be excited about. And I mean that genuinely.
I like that. That's a really good way to put it, because that's what I keep trying to tell people.
Yeah, it's think about it this way too. I'll make a statement and give an example.
Okay.
These tools are going to give you amazing superpowers. Companies want more people with superpowers than less. They don't want another example, and this is a misleading example. I'll explain why it's misleading. Come back to it. Let's say AI only worked for front-end tools. Would you rather have more superpowered front-end developers because they have these tools that make them superpower, or more, let's just say, back-end developers that didn't have superpowers? I want more of the superpower people. Yeah. Now, realistically, there's different tools for the front-end superpowers and the back-end superpowers. You're going to want both. If you're a developer and you're not playing with AI tools to see how it can help your workflow, I don't mean you have to be exhaustive. I mean, like, you know, if you want to start with the basics, use ChatGPT, or I personally recommend Claude instead. It costs the same and it does better, especially with code. And if you're not using GitHub Copilot or whatever most synonymous thing you have for your IDE, I would highly suggest you do those things, because most importantly, what they do is they build an intuition of what's AI good at and not. And when it's auto-suggesting, there are certain things that I just know that AI is going to do a good job on every time. And I have that intuition through repetition of just seeing it happen in real time with no effort from me. And I know things it will not do good at. And those things build a mental model. It's like training your brain, your neural network, to know what the AI is good at and not. So when you're building products with it, or when you're trying to find productivity games for yourself, you have that intuition of where it's going to work and not. I see people every day with the wrong intuition. Like, oh, can AI just do everything for me? It's like, have you used AI tools? No, no, it's not going to do that. It's going to, that's going to go badly. So if you think about like how it affects jobs, let me give you another example. Builder as a tool has always been a tool that takes the code and components you have and takes certain work that you have as a developer that genuinely you'll find tedious. And I think if you're thinking calmly and dispassionately, it's the tedious work you don't want to do, like marketing, wanting to move buttons around the homepage or change the color of this to see, you know, and realize the test failed, so they undo it. It doesn't feel good to be a developer doing that. You don't want to be like a middle person in between, like, say, marketing and your homepage. That sucks. objectively it sucks. And so with Builder, sometimes people before adopting the product, they have a concern like, wait, is this going to take my job away? Do I have to be worried about this? I would say only 1 to 5% of people have that concern. That concern happens. I've heard it 0% from real customers, and I keep really close to our customers. Nobody's ever adopted the product that makes their development more efficient and actually worried about their job security afterwards. When businesses can do more, they just want more. Their appetite grows faster.
It kind of reminds me of, when people said, like, I'm trying to remember who's the stand-up who said it, that if you're worried about illegal immigrants taking your job, then you've got the wrong job. It's you don't want to work in a job in those kind of jobs anyway, but is what I'm saying. So what I'm understanding from you is that it's that superpower to do away with a lot of the repetitive and let's call it less thoughtful parts of the job. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I can.
I have
go
an
ahead,
example.
Charles. Yeah,
I was just going to say, I did a couple of job interviews, and I've been using GitHub Copilot for a while. And one thing that it does for me is, right, occasionally it'll try and fill in the whole class in Ruby or the whole, component in JavaScript. But most of the time, it's just filling in the part that's sort of an atomic piece of the thing. And what it does for me that kind of makes my development better is that it gives me enough of the pieces that, from my experience, I can look at it and say, that's what I want, or that's close. Right. And so from there, then, maybe I hit tab and I have it drop it in, and then I go and I modify it to be what I need. And, sometimes it's 75%, sometimes it's 100%, and sometimes it's, no, that's just not what I want. Right. You don't understand what I'm doing. But yeah, it totally opens those doors. And the other thing that I want to jump on here is, you mentioned that, yeah, if you have superpowered engineers, people are thinking that these companies are just going to cut their costs down to the bone and just have bare bones development, AI generated code. This is generally not how companies work. Generally, the way that they work is they're going to spend what they spend to move forward with all the things that they think they want to provide to their customers. And so you're just going to be able to provide more of that.
Correct. And I recommend people don't underestimate how much, when capacity explodes, ideas and needs and desires explode. And I think it's not just proportionate, it's above proportionate. Suddenly when you think your engineers can do magic, you want to do more than magic, and you're excited because, remember, companies live in a competitive environment. So I guess I could put the CEO hat on for a minute and say, what am I paranoid against competitors? I'm paranoid that we're doing more faster than them, which means I want more superpowered AI devs who are more accelerated by the AI tools than my competitors. So we leave them in the dust. I'm not thinking, oh, we can do more, cut people. I'm saying, I'm looking at, we can do more, get ahead of the competition, maximize the resources we have, even hire more, because now the ROI makes more sense. I can hire another developer and pay them a developer salary and get way more ROI than I did for that money. So it's an obvious investment that kind of has happened. As we got more productive, we started hiring more of these developers. And the way I would suggest thinking about it is, here's an example. Has anybody ever hand coded a PDF? Heck no. You go to Chrome and you say exports PDF, and it generates the PDF for you. In my opinion, Figma designs are similar. If you get to a point where you can just generate it and then you can work with it from there, you're not going to go back to hand doing it. It's just a waste of time. So the way you can think about your work is, AI won't solve everything. You have a massive multi-million line of code base. You have a very esoteric bug. You're going to have to look into that, and you're going to have to actually dive into it. AI agents are so far from handling things like that. But when you're producing and getting ideas out and stuff like that, the drafting iteration phase can move so much faster. If you can just suck in this dashboard and you see it, but you're like, I want to move this, I want to reconnect this, I'm going to get on the code for this, I'm going to get on the prompt for this, you become like this orchestrator. And I think, a lot of engineers don't like to step into, a lot of engineers might like the idea of management because they like this idea of like parallel execution, like you have people working under you. And so you can be in charge of a project and you have 10 engineers working on it. You can do theoretically 10 times as much as if you were just the only one working on it. Cool. But you realize people are difficult. You spend your work not solving cool problems. You spend on the personnel issues. This person doesn't like that person. This person's not convinced of the roadmap, and all this stuff happens. And people realize, wait, I liked building stuff. This isn't building stuff, and I get out of management. The best part of, I could describe using AI effectively, it's like all the best parts of management. You have these minions or these tools generating things for you, but without the downsides. They don't have any types of emotions about anything. You can work through them so far. I don't think that's going to change, because like, why would it? Why would we program that? Or at least go back to the older AI that doesn't have that problem.
GitHub co-personality.
I'll be back.
Well, the other thing is you're talking about these iteration cycles that, that it speeds up. And I think one thing that a lot of people don't understand is that those iteration cycles happen now, right?
Yeah.
And if you've been on a project long enough, what typically happens is you'll get to a point where either you've accrued so much technical debt that it's impossible to work on, or what'll happen is you'll kind of get a couple of pieces in place, and then all of a sudden everything else gets easier, right?
Yeah.
And so then the sky's the limit. And what you're saying is a lot of the foundational pieces and a lot of the foundational thinking, that's mostly you just have to grind through it until you're done with it. That stuff goes away. And so then all of a sudden we have these greater capabilities, these greater opportunities. And so we can, instead of the grind taking 2 months, the grind takes 2 weeks, because we get that much further ahead, and then we can modify what we got from the AI or work with the AI for the 2 weeks to get where we needed to go. And then we can turn around and that iteration cycle happens faster.
Exactly. You could think of it like, also, you're no longer the flutist in the band. You're the entire orchestra. You're the conductor. You can make things happen.
But here's the thing that I know we're running long on time and we'll probably finish soon, but there's this one question that I really need to get off my chest, as it were. So you've been describing, and I totally agree with the fact that we need to learn these to use these AI tools. Obviously, need to learn how to best use these AI tools, and these AI tools will make us more productive. And I totally agree with that. But there's still the question of how knowledgeable do I need to be about AI? Because there's a difference between being able to, I don't know, drive a car and be the person who can pop the hood and starts fiddling with the stuff there. So how knowledgeable do I need to be about AI in order to be effective as a developer, to be desirable as a developer in the upcoming 1, 2, 5, 10 years, do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. A couple quick thoughts on this. The first one is, I personally, or like the high level one is, I personally think people just need to know how to use AI to be more productive for their own work. In doing that, you'll actually will learn a lot about the underlying pieces, so to speak, and how the technology is suitable for certain use cases versus not. A simple example there is, like, you might be writing docs in Markdown and you see how well it autocompletes certain docs. Let's say you make a writing product. Well, by learning how Copilot has worked well or not, or ChatGPT has worked well or not, and now suddenly you work on some type of writing product, a Google Docs thing, and the company wants you to build some type of AI feature. Well, you already have some baseline knowledge and intuition built around this. So the two categories probably are: one, using AI tools to be a more effective developer. You should always try and be more effective, because if you're not, your peers are. And in a certain sense, you don't want to be just so behind the train. Everybody's at a whole new level than you because you hadn't just hopped on the train. You don't want that to happen. You want to be using the best tools, the best ability to be as good as your peers, be one of the best of your peers. On the other side, there's building AI products. That is shockingly similar. And if you really want to be, if you think in 5 years, every product will be an AI product, I think that's extreme thinking, but you could think of it differently as more products will have more AI features. And if my company might want me to work on AI, it's nice to know how to work on it. again, I don't think the way to do that is to go read a bunch of white papers, build your own neural network from scratch, understand how transformer works under the hood. Again, I think that's like trying to solve psychology problems with physics and knowledge of F equals ma. It's not going to get you that far. Solve psychology problems by learning about psychology and practicing psychology in some form, studying it directly and learning that way. And I think that the beautiful thing about AI is it can solve your own problems. We talk about like the types of work devs don't want to do. You have this really exciting opportunity. Let's say, I think we talked about code debt. Like, could you make an AI workflow to help you with managing code debt, refactoring, cleaning, et cetera, code? That's a problem that you right now as an engineer might say, I hate dealing with this. I can play around with AI to try and solve my own problem. Engineers love over automating things. Let's spend a week automating something that could have taken a few hours of grunt work. Everybody's guilty of it. If you're probably any good, this is how you think.
And you know what? You could
Yeah,
probably use an AI tool to help you build your AI tool.
exactly. Make your own projects. Like
Inception.
GitHub Copilot, MicroAgent, ChatGPT, whatever can help you build it. And that's a good way to learn this stuff too. So I always think that side projects are awesome. You can learn your day-to-day using AI tools, try new ones. And again, I don't think you have to make an exhaustive list. Everybody keeps saying Cursor, AI is great. I don't care that much. I looked at the features again today. It's the same features as GitHub Copilot with some nuances. So no, I don't think you need to waste tons of time adopting every tool. There is a learning curve, but just adopt the basics and use your own time to do your own side projects sometimes, to use AI to solve your own problems. I think that'll make you equipped to be a very future-proof, very capable developer 1 year, 5 years, 10 years from now.
Very interesting in this context is I think we'll see how far it goes, but the fact that Google, for example, is actually building their own micro model into Chrome itself, that will give an interesting opportunity for people to play with the technology.
It's exciting. It's fast too. And that opens up new worlds too. This is also why you should probably get your hands on the stuff and try and solve real problems, is you start realizing why that matters. For us, one of the most common things that comes up is giant enterprise bank wants to use our AI features, but they can't send their code over the wire to a backend. So that's why you start exploring local models. Like, let's make the AI work with Olama, run it all locally on your machine. Honestly, if we weren't building AI products, I wouldn't know why people care that much about that. Sure, cost is a thing. And so we start exploring it, and we tend to find that the local models aren't powerful enough yet to solve these use cases without computers.
Also,
they
can be just too big to download.
Exactly. That's what I found. The models you need to be effective with our products right now, they're too big to download and too big to run on a local computer. The running is the hard part. You just run out of RAM. But again, when you're kind of immersed in the ecosystem, the other stuff that's happening makes more sense. Like why people care about this. Does it work yet? Window.ai will not replace ChatGPT. It's going to be a much smaller model, which are a lot dumber. But for certain use cases, it's good enough. And that's where getting your hands on is the best way to know those types of things.
Yep. All right, good deal. Well, I'm going to kind of wrap us up. I recommend you go check out the article that Steve wrote. There's also a video I saw that has the same name, and I don't know if you put that out or if it was somebody else.
Correct. It's the same thing. The same thing that's in the blog is basically covered in the video and vice versa.
Yeah, but I highly recommend that. I mentioned the Obi Fernandez episode on Ruby Rogues. He actually has a book that he wrote on how to use models like this. I think some of the code samples are in Ruby, but for the most part, it's kind of language agnostic. It's just, hey, you know, if you understand these APIs, these capabilities, then here's what you can build. And yeah, I mean, I think this really is going to continue to change the way that we're working, and so, you know, the more you can get into it ahead of the curve, I think the better off you're going to be. So, thanks for coming, Steve.
Thanks for having me. This was a ton of fun.
We're going to do our picks, and then we're going to wrap up. Dan, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah, it's not exactly a pick. So I've not been speaking about the current situation in Israel and in Gaza in the recent months, maybe because it was just too painful for me to just think about all the time. But this week, actually, a person is going to come to our company to talk about the fact that his son is kidnapped in Gaza. People tend to forget that there are still 120 Israelis kidnapped in Gaza, including one child and one baby. And it's a situation that I've hoped would have been long resolved and still hasn't been. and hopefully it will be. What can I say? It's going to be very, very difficult to even look this person in the eye. Let's put it this way. It's just such a sad situation. Anyway, sorry for bringing in such a bummer, but that's the only thing that I really had that I wanted to mention. So yeah, hopefully you can pick up the mood.
Yeah, hopefully I can. But yeah, it is sad, and I think sometimes we lose track of these things after a certain amount of time when they're not in the forefront of what we're listening to or watching or things like that. So yeah, keep in mind that these are people that we should be thinking about, praying for, and looking for solutions here, and encourage our leaders, whether it's in Congress or the president or whoever, to help figure some of this out. Yeah, we've had some stuff going on in this country too, but I'm not going to go into it.
Yeah, we spoke a little bit about it before the show.
Yeah, but be kind to your neighbors, right? I think a lot of this just comes down to the way we demonize each other, and we don't need to do that. I'm going to jump in and do a game pick. I'm going to pick a game that I've picked in the past. I just didn't get together with my buddies this week to play a board game, and this is one. My nephew's here from Illinois, and his parents are going and doing job interviews in Wyoming, and so they dropped him off here in Utah instead of dragging him around Wyoming and having him be bored with them. He can play with my kids. I say play with my kids like he's 5, he's 17. But the game I'm going to pick is Mysterium. I always do a board game pick, Steve, at the beginning of my picks. And so Mysterium is a game where you have one person giving clues, and then you have other people trying to figure out what the clues mean. And so you have all the players but one are psychics, and then the person giving the clues is a ghost, and there have been murders in this house. And so they hand cards to the psychics, and the psychics try and determine who the person, the place, or the murder weapon is. And then there are expansions where you instead of doing a murder weapon, you do a motive. But it's a pretty fun game. Takes an hour or so to play. Sometimes it's really hard because you've got all kinds of interesting things on this card. It's just this this picture. And so anyway, yeah, you go through the rounds. You pick the first person first. You guess the place next, and then the object. And if you get all three, and everybody gets if all the psychics solve their murder, then the ghost has one final round where they give 3 cards, and depending on how well you were doing at guessing whether or not the other psychics were correct or not, and how early you got yours done, you get to see 1, 2, or 3 of those cards, and those are hints toward one of the murders that the psychic solved, and that's the ghost, the person who's been giving clues, that's their murder. And it's kind of a majority wins thing on that one. It has a Board Game Geek weight of 1.9. I keep telling people that kind of the average friendly board game that's approachable to people who don't play board games is about a 2, right? And so this is right in there in that area. It's kind of a fun social game, and I really enjoy it. The kids were playing it. They helped my 8-year-old play it. I don't know if an 8-year-old could pick up on all the nuances of it without help, but they just helped her play. And so anyway, fun game. Like I said, there are expansions for it. It came out in 2015. So I'm going to pick Mysterium. I was talking to Dan before Steve got on. He asked me how I was, and I was like tired because I had just gone for a run. I'm training for another marathon. So I'm going to just do a couple of shout outs on that. I have been doing the trainings off of a Training Peaks training that I bought. So Training Peaks is free. and you can buy training that you can stick on your calendar, and those are just fixed costs. So I think I bought this one for 20 or 30 bucks. And so you just tell it when your race is, and it, mine's a 16-week program. So, I had to figure out when it started and just stick it in, and it puts the workouts on my phone, on my Garmin app, which syncs to my watch. I have a Garmin Forerunner 235, which is not anywhere near the newest model, but it works great. So anyway, that's what I'm doing for running. And then finally, this week, I'm working on getting AI for JavaScript.com up. I'm also doing AI for Ruby.com. And so you can go and you can get on the email list, and I'm going to be emailing out, hey, this is what I'm doing with AI this week. These are the APIs I used. I plan on doing all my examples in both languages, so you'll get the JavaScript ones on the JavaScript list and the Ruby ones on the Ruby list. And I'm also looking at putting together a summit at the end of September, or the end of August, beginning of September. We'll probably have people like Steve. I've been talking to a bunch of the other folks in the Ruby community that I know that are doing AI. And really, I want to be hitting it at this level, right? Where it's not, hey, here's how you math your way into models that work. This is, hey, you've got a model that works, or here's how maybe you modify a model that you have to train it a little bit. But I want it to be approachable for people who want to add AI features to applications, not how to solve whatever thing by managing a data lake and then feeding it into a system that generates the model, and then how to test the model and all that stuff. We'll get into some of that at a high level, but mostly we're going to be talking about, hey, here are the APIs for Claude or GPT-4 or Midjourney, or whatever. I do podcasts, so Whisper. So here's how you use these to get what you need, and then here's maybe how you tie a few of them together to get a more complicated result than you can get from any one of them. And so that's what I'm looking at. And so anyway, I'll be emailing people on the email list. Right now, I'm just finalizing my system because I've kind of had to rework bits of the email stuff that I've been doing. So if you're interested, go to AI for JavaScript.com. I'm also going to be doing weekly calls for JavaScript Geniuses. You can find that at javascriptgeniuses.com. And that's going to be sort of a back and forth, ask questions, get answers. If you have feedback or ideas for people, you can help out, and help people get where they want to go with that as well. But kind of more of a mastermind or group coaching sort of setup is kind of a blend. But we'll be doing calls for that every week, and you'll be getting some AI stuff in there too. So anyway, those are my picks and my self promos. Steve, what are your picks?
Yeah. I think probably just the obvious ones. Check out Builder, check out Visual Copilot. And I mentioned briefly, but MicroAgent is a pretty interesting CLI tool that if you want to categorize AI tools into sort of like commonly used today, ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot, Claude, and then where things are going, agents, I do very much believe in agents in the medium to long term. I don't see many practical use cases for them today, but MicroAgent is the only one that I've used. Obviously, I'm biased here, obviously, but it kind of solves some of the fundamental challenges. I've got a blog post talking about this in better detail, but some of the challenges of agents, and I think that
I just posted the link for MicroAgent blog post.
Like many things, I believe in technology growing in layers incrementally, as opposed to the V1 is supposed to solve everything for everyone, like a Devin or whatever, a super AI agent that does everything. And so what's interesting about MicroAgent and why I suggest people try it out is it is a very, I think, new technique, and it can lead to a lot of interesting things. So people trying it and giving feedback, I think, is really interesting, because I think that's how we solve these problems over time, is how to make agents work, make it work really well for something. And I think this tool works really well for a certain type of problem. And I think I have ideas and experiences that suggest what's really good at, but I'd love to get more feedback from people, what they've found success and not success with, and just more input, GitHub issues, pull requests. People have added some cool new features to it. So I think it's an interesting area of both a practical tool and like an avenue for research and development that you could be part of in AI and AI agents and stuff like that I would value. I want the project to be as community driven as possible. So check it out, get feedback, create issues, send pull requests for improvements or fixes or whatever, and let me know what you think.
Awesome. People want to find you on the internet. Where do they find you, Steve?
I am Steve8708 on Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn. I don't know, all the places, but those are the ones I'm probably most commonly active on.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming. This has been awesome.
Thanks for having me. This is really fun.
All right, folks, we're going to wrap it here. Till next time, Max out.
Bye.
All right, hang on.